children lost, ensnared by a witch's binding spell. Jessie, the awakened soul, yearns to escape and find a new home. Dare you join her and explore more?
And I could almost guarantee you that at least 50% of these games all of you guys have played before. I'm making that guess right now. We're not gonna go into obvious ones like Bloody Mary because we all know we've played that. It's scary. There have been bad things that have happened. It's just a really well-known one that we don't really need to delve into today. But that is one example. So the first one we're gonna talk about is Ring Around the Rosie. Everybody knows that famous riddle. Do I really have to sing it for you right now? Ring around the Rosie, a pocket full of posies. You basically all join hands with your friends and skip around in a constant circle singing that song. It kind of looks like a ritual. However, a lot of people don't know that the lyrics you are singing actually reflect a really dark time in historical England. Scholars have studied this song and concluded that the joyful little song is about an outbreak of the bubonic plague that affected London in 1665. So this song is not happy-go-lucky, it is about the bubonic plague. So like I was just singing, listen to these lyrics carefully. Ring around the Rosie, a pocket full of posies, a tissue, we all fall down. I've also heard other versions sing ashes, ashes, we all fall down. So the first line about the roses are actually the symbolism of the deadly red rashes that people would get on their skin from the plague. A lot of the time the rash developed around their eyes and it looked like roses. Pocket full of posies were flowers that you would put in the pockets of people who passed away so that they wouldn't smell. A tissue is basically the symbolism of people getting sick because sneezing and sniffling was one of the main symptoms of the plague. And then the last line, we all fall down, symbolizes everybody dying from the plague. So with this all in mind, thinking about the song Ring Around the Rosie just really disturbs me. And the fact that as kids, we just thought it was this fun game, but it's really not. I'm sorry if I'm ruining your childhood, but I really feel like this needs to be said. The next creepy game is called the Candyman. It's a very similar game to Bloody Mary, so you've probably heard of it before. They've made like movies and stuff on the Candyman. It's a scary guy. The legend goes that the Candyman can be summoned if you say his name 5 times while looking into a mirror at midnight. If it works, a pair of red glowing eyes will appear in the mirror and you'll have mere seconds to turn on the lights and run to the brightest spot in your house. If you don't do this, then the Candyman can catch you with his like hook hand thing and it just wouldn't be a very good situation for you. So a lot of people do play this game at sleepovers and stuff, but honestly, it's a really creepy game to play as a kid. The next game is Paranormal Simon Says. Now, I always used to play Simon Says as a kid. I mean, it was a pretty fun game, I guess, if you're little. Simon says, touch your nose. Simon says, make a funny face. And kids will be like, oh my god, I love this. But when kids got older, they discovered the Paranormal Simon Says. The rules are to sit at a table, light a candle, and invite a spirit to sit at the opposite side of the table with you. Let them know you'd like them to follow your requests with the game Simon Says. And it says, for example, you can say, Simon says tap on the table. Simon says move your chair. Simon says kick my leg. So you're instructing the ghost to do something to prove it's there. I probably would never do something like this because I don't do like seances and rituals portals and talking with spirits because bad things have happened to me so far in my life and I'm trying to not attract spirits right now. This next game is called Don't Look Behind You. It kind of reminds me of What Time Is It, Mr. Wolf? I'm sure you've played that one before. And by the way, that game did scare me too. But Don't Look Behind You is also a paranormal game. And what's weird is it says this game must not even be talked about unless the speaker is extending an invitation to play it. So I shouldn't even be talking about this, but I am. So you're supposed to play this game with a spirit, either with a friend or by yourself, but it has to be in the darkness. Facing the wall, players say, I want to play a game. I will count to 10 before I turn around. When I turn around, you must freeze. You may only move when I am not looking. The game ends when the light comes on or when you touch me on my right shoulder. So the game ends when the spirit comes up and touches your shoulder, but the whole time you're trying to see if it'll like run around and move. I don't know, it's confusing. I would never play this. This next game is called Concentrate, and I do kind of remember this from my childhood. Concentrate was sort of like a form of simple hypnosis. It involved speaking a rhyme in a sing-song voice while beating rhythmatically on your friend's back. You then go into a trance and find out how you will die. So, wouldn't recommend playing that. The next one is called Miss Mary Mac. This was also a clapping game, and this is how the lyrics go. Maybe you'll recognize this. Miss Mary Mac, 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 all dressed in black, 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 with silver buttons, 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 all down her back, back, back. Now, when kids used to play this clapping game, it was just a fun riddle to do at recess or whatever. But if you actually look back into the history of this whole song is a riddle, and the answer to the riddle is coffin. So Miss Mary Mac, all dressed in black with buttons, is actually lying in a coffin, and that is what the riddle is about. This next game is really disturbing to me because anything to do with going deep into your mind scares me. Kind of like the movie Inception. That movie used to freak me out. This game is called Red Door, Yellow Door. It's basically guided meditation into the deepest parts of your brain. So the way you do it is you close your eyes and you visualize your brain as being a corridor, and in this corridor there is a red door and a yellow door, and you always have to choose which one you want to open, and you have to visualize it in your mind. So let's say you're walking down the corridor and you choose the red door. You have to open it and go through. Then there's another corridor and you see, let's say, a blue door and a purple door. You have to decide which one to open, and you keep going through opening all these doors, and the more you do it, the farther you go into the deepest parts of your mind. But what's scary is that it says, be careful not to get lost and remember the way back. So it might seem fun to keep going through these doors in your mind, but you have to remember all those doors you've been through, you have to go back through to be like conscious again. I just don't mess with that stuff. I mean, it's probably not real and not accurate and you can't do stuff that way, but I just wouldn't mess with it. This next game is called Red Rover, and I remember this being such a dangerous game when I was back in school, and I would go home with bruises and marks on my arm from this. I'm gonna try and explain it. It's basically where you hold hands with people beside you, and there's this person who has to try and break through your arms, like running at you at full speed. But this game has actually been banned from a lot of schools because of injuries. It says people have had torn rotator cuffs, dislocated shoulders, ruined friendships. I mean, it's just bruises waiting to happen. I don't know why this was ever a fun game. And the last one is called Serita, which I think means sister sister, but I'm not really sure. You basically sit on the floor across from your friend, and together you say, Serita, can we play your game? Then both of you will toss a coin into the air and catch it in your hands. If you both get heads, the answer is yes. If you both get tails, the answer is no. If you get a heads and a tail, the answer is maybe. So in order to proceed with the game, you both have to get a yes. Once you do, you can ask Serita any question you want. And when you are finished, you must ask Serita if you can exit the game the same way you entered. So you have to say, can I exit the game, and then toss a coin. So imagine it took like an hour for you both to get yes. That would be so scary. Alright, so in today's video, video, we're gonna be talking about 2 retro playground games, and I know you guys know these 2 games. The first one is jump rope, and the next one is hopscotch. So we're gonna be going into the history, and then we're gonna be talking about some very creepy things that have to do with those 2 games. So let's start off with a little bit of history about playgrounds. And by the way, my audio hasn't been fixed yet, I'm so sorry. We're gonna have some echoes in here for a while. So the world's very first playgrounds ever were actually called sand gardens, and these were invented in Germany in 1885. They were basically what just looked like these very large sandboxes. There were no swings, there were no slides, it was literally just sand on the ground that kids had to play in. Imagine telling your teacher that you're bored and she's like, go sit in the sand, Timmy. That would be fun. It wasn't until the early 1900s that they started creating things like slides, ladders, steel pipes, things that you could climb. And this equipment was actually quite dangerous back then. They would have frequent accidents. Kids would just be falling off these things every single day. And the girls and boys had separate areas, so they were never allowed to actually mix together. And then obviously, fast forward now, we have very modern playgrounds. Everything is like super safe. You rarely even see anything metal anymore. Most things are like plastic now. So let's get into jump rope. I know everybody watching has used a jump rope before. Jump rope originated in the Netherlands and made its way across the Atlantic in the 1600s. It's literally a piece of rope that you rotate around your body and jump at the same time. It's pretty straightforward. I remember how excited I was when I first taught myself how to use a jump rope. Like, it seems very basic, but when you're a kid and you master it, you're like, yes, I am the queen of jumping. The next day I went to school and showed off in front of everybody in the playground. And yes, I know it's not that impressive, but little Jessii thought it was. So let's talk about a very scary story that's called the Headless Jump Rope Girl. Yeah, there's a story about a little girl who went to a summer camp in the middle of the woods. The camp was built in 1923, so it was extremely old. Rumors went around that a headless ghost playing jump rope could be seen on the camp's playground after the sun went down. And she would just be out there by herself, not even blinking, just staring at anybody who was watching her. You knew she was there because you would be lying in your bed and you'd hear the tapping of the rope hitting the pavement over and over again. And she didn't bother anyone, so it wasn't even like she was necessarily that evil. It just made people who saw her very uncomfortable, obviously. People say that she had drowned in the lake back in the 50s. So now she haunts the camp with her favorite jump rope that she had brought with her. So whenever kids went to camp, they were allowed to bring like one item with them that they would like to play with, and this headless ghost brought her jump rope. So now she's stuck with that in the afterlife. So let's move on to the jump rope Paranormal game. You guys knew this one was coming. So I was looking through the comments of this story, and so many people were saying that if you go into your basement and use a jump rope after the sun goes down, she may come and join you. Apparently you have to go down there and say, Layla, come and jump with me, over and over again until she comes and joins you. And like I said before, apparently she's a very friendly, good spirit, so she's not gonna actually harm you. But let me tell you, if I see a little ghost girl playing jump rope in my basement, I am out of here. I kind of want to play this game over on my vlog channel, so we'll see. If I do, it'll be over on that channel. This really reminds me of something called Jumping Jenny. It was a creepy animatronic doll that they were selling at Party City around Halloween, and her name was literally Jumping Jenny. And yes, it's just this doll who like actually moves and plays jump rope. And I don't know about you guys, but animatronics freak me out so much. Like, dolls are scary as they are, but when they move and have batteries and just I actually kind of wanted to get this Jumping Jenny for last Halloween, but I feel like every time I'd walk past her it would freak me out so much because obviously they have those like automatic things where if someone passes, they start moving, and I don't want her to jump near me. Another scary thing that a lot of people know about are called the jump rope children. And these kids actually used to freak me out. They're from the movie Nightmare on Elm Street, and these girls playing jump rope are frequently seen throughout these movies. And while they are jumping, they sing the adaptation of the children's nursery rhyme 1, 2, Buckle My Shoe. So if you guys are familiar with Nightmare on Elm Street, there's this rhyme that goes 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you, 3, 4, better lock your door, 5, 6, grab a crucifix, 9, 10, never sleep again. And that's like the known Freddy Krueger scary song. And I don't know guys, there's just something creepy about jump ropes, which sounds silly, but it's true. So now that we've talked about jump ropes, let's move on to Hopscotch, which is another game that I know you guys have played at least at some point in your life. And by the way, anytime I hear the word hopscotch, I think of that scene from The Corpse Bride, where she angrily says, "Hopscotch," to Victor and then pulls him down to the underworld. If you haven't seen that, woo, go watch it. Hopscotch is an age-old children's game based on an idea of not stepping on lines. You must hop over the line drawn on the ground, and the lines are drawn in a variety of patterns, and sometimes the spaces in the diagrams are numbered. The earliest ever recorded game of hopscotch was actually in 1677, and the game back then was actually called Scotch Hoppers. So I'm gonna tell you a story called Late Night Hopscotch. This story is about a little boy who had a really terrible home life. He had a father and a stepmother that didn't treat him very well at all. They were just very hard on him. They had so many rules in the house, and they would often threaten to not even give him dinner if he came home from school with bad marks. So at night when his parents went to bed, he climbed out his window and drew the hopscotch game on the road in front of his house using chalk. He just wanted to be out of his house doing something fun for once, and the only time he could do that was when his parents were asleep. Well, whenever he'd be playing the game, a little girl in a blue polka dot dress and curly blonde hair would walk down the road and ask to play too. So he would draw a second hopscotch game on the road beside his so she could also play along. And they actually started to become very good friends because whenever he was outside at night, she would come on and join him. One day his parents caught him playing outside on the road. So his father angrily walked out to get him, and the boy said, "I'm sorry, Dad, I just wanted to play hopscotch with Jenny." And his father looked very confused at him because his son was pointing beside him and there was no one there. The boy started describing the girl in the polka dot dress, and the father's face went white. He was describing a little girl that had gone missing in the neighborhood 15 years prior, and the police unfortunately found her body and she had not made it out alive. So this whole time he was playing hopscotch with her spirit. And I've read that children ghosts love to play games with you. So if you ever want like a ghostly hopscotch partner, just draw an extra one beside you when the sun goes down, and you never know who may join you. I was actually reading through comments and different articles online, and people have said if you draw 2 hopscotch games beside each other, you are inviting a child ghost to play with you. Should I try that as well? Oh my goodness. So let's jump right into the video talking about the I Spy game. So you guys probably know the rules because I bet you've played it growing up. But basically, one person plays the spy, if you will, and they look around them and try and find a specific object, and then they say, "I spy with my little eye something that is," and you can choose a color, you can choose a shape, you can choose something that starts with the letter blank. And once that person has guessed correctly, they become the spy, and then they choose something for you to find. It's most commonly a game used in a car during a long road trip to pass the time. I remember my sister and I used to play this game all the time with my parents. It was just so much fun. It never got boring. And the game actually originated in the 1920s. The concept likely originated from the spy mania that occurred during and after World War II. So back around that time, people were so into like spy movies and spy things. Now what's very strange is that when this game first came out, the rule was that you could only play it with 2 players, which when I was a kid, it didn't really matter how many players you were using. Like literally I had my mom, my dad, my sister, and I always playing this game. Then I remember in the early 90s, the Scholastic brand came out with these I Spy books, and people went crazy over them. I believe there was over 100 of these books made. Their pages had a mishmash of objects that you had to spot whatever item they told you to find. So this definitely passed the time. These pages were filled with pictures of all kinds of different things. But I do remember there was this specific I Spy book that always used to scare me, and it had pages of clowns. I just remember they had these pages with spooky clown dolls that would just stare at you as you looked through the book. And I distinctly remember having nightmares about these pages. So if you guys remember these I Spy books, please comment down below. But let's get into the I Spy creepypasta. There was a story about this mother and daughter who played the I Spy game every single night before her daughter went to bed. Except they put a little spin on the game. Basically, they would turn off all the lights in her room and they would use a flashlight to play I Spy. So for example, the mother would start off by saying something like,
"I spy with my little eye something green with spots."
And then the daughter would take the flashlight and look around the dark room until she found out it was one of the sleeves on her sweater that were sticking out of her drawer. Then it was the little girl's turn for her to pick out something for her mother to find. So she said,
"I spy with my little eye something that is white and shiny."
So the mother looked around the room with the flashlight and she guessed about 15 different things, and none of those things were right. And it was getting late, it was past her daughter's bedtime, so she said,
"I give up. What is it?"
So the daughter took the flashlight and pointed to the back corner of her closet, and she said,
"It's Mr. Thomas. He's smiling at you."
And the mother was shocked to see this crouched creature sitting in the back of her daughter's closet with this bright white shiny smile on his face. So the daughter was trying to point out his teeth. It's so creepy. And I'm very glad nothing like that ever happened to my sister and I when we played I Spy. Alright, the next traditional game we're going to talk about is called spin tops. Spin tops are among the oldest toys ever discovered by archaeologists. Guys, the earliest ever recording of a spin top was 6,000 years ago. There was even one found in the tomb of King Tut. A spinning top is held upright by angular momentum. They don't change direction or slow down without the application of an outside force. So they're actually quite fascinating to watch. They just spin and spin forever. Now, this toy was quite popular back in the European Renaissance period, and these toys are actually depicted in many famous paintings. There's a painting from the 1500s called Children's Games by Bruegel, where you can see this little boy holding a spin top up in the air. And there's another one that was painted in the 1700s named Boy with Top by Chardin. Now, there's actually a world record right now for the longest time a spin top has been spinning, and I think it's at 50 minutes. And I don't know about you guys, but I always think of the movie Inception whenever I see one of these toys. So let's get into the spin top creepypasta. This is about a girl who would always hear these strange noises in her grandmother's house whenever she was sleeping over there. The bedroom she slept in was right underneath the attic, and every single night she would hear this faint scratching sound coming from the ceiling above her. So she tried to be rational and assumed that it must have been some animal that was up in the attic, but sometimes it would keep her up all night. She says it almost sounded like someone was dragging their fingernails across the attic floor, and that's why she would hear it on her ceiling. On occasion, she would call her grandmother into the room to see if her grandmother could find out what was wrong, but her grandmother would always just say,
"It's an old house. It makes strange noises."
One day she was going through a box of her grandma's old records when she stumbled across a photo album that looked to be from the late 1800s. All the pictures seemed to show this family of four, nothing really wrong with it, but as she looked through the pictures, her heart stopped when she saw one of a little boy sitting on the floor playing with a spin top. So she quickly called her grandmother in the room and she said, "Were all these pictures taken in this house? Was this the family that lived here before you?" And her grandmother nodded yes. So the girl ran upstairs, opened the door to the attic, climbed up the ladder, and the first thing she saw when she peered her head up through the entrance of the attic was a spin top sitting in the very center of the floor right above her bedroom. And that's how this story ends. So obviously it's like the spirit of this little boy plays with this spin top during the night, which is so creepy. I literally always say that sentence in every single video I film. That's so creepy. And the last game we're going to be talking about is called Blind Man's Bluff. Now, this is a children's game that was first played 2,000 years ago in Greece, but it actually has different names depending on where it's played in Europe. For example, sometimes it's called Blind Fly. There's also Blind Cow and Blind Hen. One of the group members is blindfolded and runs around trying to catch the others, and they all try and stay out of this person's grasp. But every so often they'll try and run up to the person to get near to them. So basically it's kind of like tag, and if this blindfolded person grabs onto somebody, they have to guess who they think it is. If they get the answer right, they take off their blindfold and the person they caught becomes the one who's it. But if they guess the person wrong, they have to set the person free and continue playing. So now that you get the gist of the game, let's get into the creepypasta. There's a story about a group of kids who were playing Blind Man's Bluff in a field near a forest. And after playing for a little while, one of the kids suggested that it might be more fun to actually play this game in the middle of the forest, because there would be more obstacles to make it a little bit harder. So they all agreed and made their way into the maze of trees. And there was this girl named Judy who was the seeker and had to put her blindfold on. Things were going fine at first, until she began noticing that she couldn't hear her friends anymore. Assuming that maybe they were just staying extra quiet to fool her, she kept walking farther and farther into the forest, until finally she bumped into somebody. She grabbed them and said,
Caught you! I'm gonna guess you're Tom?
but she got no answer, so she assumed she guessed the wrong person and let them go. Farther and farther she walked into the forest with still no sounds of her friends. But then she bumped into somebody else, so she grabbed them and said,
I'm gonna guess this is Sarah?
but still no answer, so she let them go. She was getting frustrated and decided to take off her blindfold, and she was startled to see that she was standing in the middle of the forest in pitch black with no friends around her. She didn't know how much time had gone by. She had no idea where she was. So she sat in the forest until the sun came up and a search and rescue party found her. When she was reunited with her friends, she asked them why they had left her in the middle of the forest. And she also asked them why they kept running away after she had caught them. Now, what's super creepy is that they told her that she hadn't had a chance to catch any of them because they lost sight of her only 2 minutes after playing the game. So who was it that she kept running into in the middle of the forest? And that's how the story ends. So she was clearly catching things that weren't her friends, which is so eerie. That's so creepy, as I like to say. The first game is gonna sound so random, but we're gonna be talking about Duck, Duck, Goose. Now, obviously, I feel like everybody in the world has played this game, so I don't really need to go too detailed into the rules, but just in case you've never played this, basically all the players sit in a circle and the person who is it walks around while tapping on people's heads, saying duck, 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 over and over and over as they go around the circle. And the person's head that they touch while saying goose has to then chase them around the circle, and you see who sits down first. Now, this game originated from Sweden, and the original title of this game was actually Duck, Duck, Gray Duck, which is really interesting. I have no idea how we turned it into Goose. But apparently this game was actually made to teach kids patience, because as they sit in the circle, they have to wait to see if they get tapped as the goose. I remember whenever I played this in like elementary school, primary school, I would feel so anxious sitting in this circle. This is probably where my anxiety started, because I never wanted to be the goose. All the other kids around me were like,
Pick me, I wanna be the goose.
and I was sitting there like,
I don't wanna be the goose, don't choose me. I don't wanna be the goose.
comment down below if you wanted to be the goose, because if you were one of those kids, you were brave. I had so much social anxiety. Anyways, let's get into the scary side, because with all of these retro games, I was able to find one scary story that goes along with them. There was a story I found about this girl that collected tons of porcelain dolls. She had so many in her bedroom that she had shelves everywhere that they would sit on. And once a week, she would have tea parties with them. So she would set up about 12 of them around a small table in her bedroom. And then she would call her next door neighbor over, and they would just sit there and have like pretend tea parties. I don't know about you guys, but that kind of reminds me of that scene from Toy Story. And I'm like laughing just thinking about it because of when Buzz Lightyear was Miss Nesbit and he was like,
I'm Mrs. Nesbit.
when I was a kid, I would literally rewind that scene just to watch it over and over. My sister knows what I'm talking about. Anyways, Anyways though, after they were all done drinking their tea, they would play a game of Duck, Duck, Goose. So the girl would walk around this table slowly tapping all of the dolls' heads saying duck, 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 duck. And the doll that she chose to be the goose, she would pick up and she would throw it across her room into her toy box. She's lucky the porcelain didn't break. But that's basically how she would put her dolls away. She would play a game of Duck, Duck, Goose until they were all gone. Well, one night, the girl was wide awake, listening to the thunderstorm out her window, when she heard a sound of scuffling across her carpet. It almost sounded like something small was walking around her room, but obviously she wasn't able to see anything because her bedroom was pitch black. And just before she got up to investigate, she heard a small voice. And this voice sounded like it was right beside her bed. As she listened, she heard,
Duck, duck, goose. Duck, duck, goose.
over and over again, and the voice sounded like it was going around her bed in circles, just around her bed, saying this as if it was actually trying to play Duck, Duck, Goose with her. The girl jolted up and turned on her light, and the voice suddenly stopped. And when she peered over her bed, she saw one of the dolls she had thrown in the toy box earlier lying on the floor. So is the moral of this story to be gentle with your dolls? Because I feel like if I was a kid and I threw my dolls all over the place, they would probably come for me at night too. But yeah, this was like one of the creepiest Duck, Duck, Goose stories I was able to find, because I don't think there are many out there. And the next old game we're gonna be talking about is Truth or Dare, which I know all of you have played. And obviously this game is still played today, but the origins of it were from quite a long time ago. I remember when I was younger and I played this game, it was usually played at like birthday parties or sleepovers. And obviously it's where you ask somebody truth or dare, and they have to pick one of the options. If they choose truth, you have to ask them a really difficult question that might reveal some secret that they're holding. And if they choose dare, you have to make them do something that will probably embarrass them or freak them out. I don't know about you guys, but whenever I play this game, 99% of the time I would choose truth, because I never wanted to do anything crazy. And like, even though it's truth, you can still lie, like they'll never know. I mean, I'm just kidding. Now, what might surprise people is that this game has actually existed for hundreds of years. And the original title of this game was called Questions and Commands, and it was created in the 1700s. It used to be very popular to play at Christmas back in those times. And the rules would be that a commander of a house would bid his subjects to answer questions that he would come up with. And the rule is, if they didn't answer these questions, their face would be dirtied. That's literally what it says. Their face would be dirtied. That is like their punishment for not answering truthfully. So like there would be like a king, and he would call over one of his servants and he would be like,
"What did you eat for dinner yesterday? Be honest."
And if they couldn't remember or they weren't honest for some reason, their face would be dirtied. There's actually this painting that I was able to find by the artist named James Gilray. This is from 1788, showing a bunch of people in a room playing this game. And it almost looks like that man was like commanded to smell that poor woman's feet. I don't know, that's what it looks like to me. But yeah, now that you know this strange history, let's talk about a creepy story. There's a story about this group of teenagers that were staying in an old cabin in the woods that they had found. Why do all these stories start with an old cabin in the woods? While they were there, they decided to play a game of truth or dare using dice. So depending on how you rolled it, it would tell you which option you had to go with. Now, there was this guy named Mike who was there, and it was his turn to play. But he wasn't really worried because he was a pretty out there dude and he wasn't afraid to do crazy things. Well, his friends dared him to go down into the basement of this cabin. And this door was literally bolted shut. And there was this slight weird smell coming from underneath the doorway. So Mike walked over and kicked down the door in only 3 attempts. And he was feeling really brave until he began walking down the stairs. The air was musty and cold. It was like no one had been down there for decades. And the rule was that he had to go into the basement and walk to the very back of the wall and touch it to complete this dare. When he got to the bottom, he could barely see anything because there was no windows and it was pitch black. And there were puddles all over the floor. So he began began to walk with his hands out in front of him because he couldn't see anything. And he had no idea how far he needed to go, so he just kept walking and walking until he felt like he touched a damp wall in front of him. So he assumed it must have been the back of the basement. Touched it! He yelled for his friends to hear upstairs. But as soon as he said that, the surface he was touching began to move underneath his fingers. It almost had the motion of someone breathing. And in that moment, he realized it was not a wall he had touched, but instead someone's bare back that was standing in the basement with him. So he instantly ran up the stairs, grabbed a couch, and pushed it in front of the door so whatever that thing was, it couldn't get out of the basement. And he vowed to never play Truth or Dare ever again. So obviously that door was bolted for a reason. That's why you don't open bolted basement doors. Okay, so to start off, let's talk about some rock, paper, scissors history. This game originated in China, and it's a hand game usually played with 2 people. So you both have to form 1 out of 3 different shapes with your outstretched hand. Rock is in a fist, paper is a flat hand, and scissors is 2 fingers spread apart. You guys know this. You guys know this, right? And I'm also sure you guys know the outcome of this game. Rock beats scissors, paper beats rock, and scissors beats paper. A lot of people play this game to settle something or to determine who goes first for something. It's definitely a game of chance, but if you know the person that you're playing with very, very well, you might be able to guess what they're gonna choose. Do you guys wanna play a game with me right now through the screen? Comment down below if I won or if you won. And you have to be honest, okay? Are you ready? We're gonna play literally through the screen right now. I feel like Dora or something, interacting with my audience through the screen. Okay, are you ready? Rock, paper, scissors. Did I win? Did you choose a rock or a scissors? The first ever mention of this game in history was in the 1600s. So like I said, people have been playing this game for a very, very long time, which I'm not really surprised about because it's literally just a game you play with your hands. You don't need any game pieces for it, so you can play it wherever you go. You can go up to strangers and be like,
Want to play rock, paper, scissors? All we need is our hands.
Now, in my research, I found out that rock is the most played of all time. So when people play this game, they usually choose rock. Did you choose rock? And actually, scissors is the least played move. All right, so now that you know about the history, let's get into the creepypasta. There's a creepypasta talking about how you should never play rock, paper, scissors with your reflection in the mirror. And if you do, you better hope that your reflection keeps playing the same thing that you do. So for example, if you play this game in front of your reflection and you end up choosing rock, you better hope your reflection chooses the same thing. Or if you choose paper, you want your reflection to also choose paper. Obviously, it's your reflection, it's supposed to do the same thing you do. But it says that if your reflection suddenly chooses a different option and wins, it will attack you with whatever it chose. So for example, it says this one time this person was playing this game with their reflection and the reflection ended up choosing scissors and the person had chose paper. So the reflection literally came out of the mirror to try to attack this person with scissors. So if that happens, you better run away because your reflection's gonna make a paper snowflake out of you, if you know what I mean. This creepypasta really freaks me out because reflections have always freaked me out in general, and I just think playing a game with my reflection would drive me crazy. But I am thinking of trying this on my vlog channel because, you know me, I am crazy. The rules say for better results to play this in dim light with a candle, which would definitely be even spookier to do, so maybe I'll try it in the daytime and then at nighttime. Listen guys, this just goes to show you to never underestimate your reflection. All right, let's move on to our next game that has been played for hundreds of years, and this is skipping stones. I know you've tried this once in your life as well. Stone skipping refers to the art of throwing a flat stone across the water in such a way that it bounces off the surface. The objective of skipping is to see how many times a stone can bounce across the water before it sinks. So people will usually have competitions to see who can go farther. And I know whenever I went to like a lake or a beach with my dad, he would always try and do this. And he was actually pretty good at it. Since 1997, competitors from all over the world have taken part in the World Stone Skimming Championships. I did not know they had literal championships for stone skipping. You learn something new every day. And according to the Guinness World Records, the most rock skips that anyone has ever done is 88 in a row. And this was done by a man named Kurt Stein keener. 88 skips, guys. That's insane. I think the most I've ever skipped in my life was probably 2, and that happened like once or twice. Comment down below how many rock skippings you've ever done. Maybe we can find the V team champion, but you have to be honest, okay? All right, so let's get into this rock skipping creepypasta. This is a story from the 70s about a little boy that had a family cottage in the woods. Now, they had quite a few ponds and lakes surrounding this cottage, but there was one particular body of water that was completely off limits. It was fairly small and murky. The water was so dark it would be impossible to see the bottom or any wildlife swimming in there. And his parents had always told him to stay away from it because of the countless children that had drowned in the water over the years. They said it had a strange type of seaweed that grabbed onto legs and didn't let go. And this one particular day, the boy's parents had told him to go out and look for firewood. He walked around the cottage but couldn't find any good pieces. So he walked farther and farther until he got to the forbidden water. Now, the water was so still that it looked like glass. It almost looked like no one had disturbed it for decades. And because it was so peaceful, he had the urge to throw something into it. Why do I relate to this boy so much? This is something I would do. So he picked up some stones and began throwing them onto the dark surface of the water. Then again and again and again to see how many stones he could skip in a row. When he was tired, he picked up some firewood and began to walk back to the cottage. But after only a few steps, he heard rustling in the water behind him. And when he turned around, he saw multiple figures emerging from its depths. In each place he had thrown a stone into the water, there was a head literally coming out of the surface. He counted about 30 tiny figures. All of their faces were covered in their soaking wet hair, and their skin looked gray and bloated. Why did he ever disturb the water? He thought as he ran back to his cottage. He told his parents what happened, and they locked themselves inside, hiding under the staircase out of view from any windows. And the last thing they saw was a large puddle of water emerging from underneath their front door. And that's how it ended, so I guess the creepy water people were after them. Not sure what happened to them in the end, but I can assume it wasn't good. Alright guys, so let's get into the Peekaboo game's origins. Peekaboo is said to have originated from the 1590s, and it is a form of play primarily played with an infant. So as you know, one player hides their face and then suddenly reveals it again saying Peekaboo. Sometimes it's even followed with I see you, which kind of creepy. Like I said, it's a pretty straightforward game, and I feel like everyone played this when they were a kid. And I don't know about you guys, but this game actually really used to scare me. It never made me laugh. It never made me just surprised. It made me terrified. I think I cried every time an adult did this to me. There's just something so startling about suddenly seeing a giant adult face in front of your baby face. Oh, and the got your nose game was awful as well. Is that just me? Comment down below if you were also afraid of those games. Peekaboo is thought by developmental psychologists to demonstrate an infant's inability to understand object permanence, which is basically the understanding that objects continue to exist even though you can't see them, or when they can't be sensed. Okay, so the next thing is a warning, sort of a myth, a legend, about why you should never play Peekaboo with your reflection. And I feel like mirrors and your reflection is like a theme we have going on this channel. Even stuff to do with your shadow. And now I guess the Peekaboo game is included in that. It is said that if you play this in the mirror on the 6th time you open your hands to reveal your face, you'll see something completely different from the face you're used to seeing. Your face will apparently be revealed to be old and twisted and just not completely human, like something dreadful to look at. They say that people who have tried this have become so fearful that they have either gone insane from the paranoia of wanting to know what the face in the mirror was, or they have removed all the mirrors in their house, never wanting to look at the reflection ever again. It is said that the only way you can see this otherworldly creature is if you're looking straight into the eyes of your reflection as you're playing. And you also need to audibly say the words, Peekaboo, I see you in the mirror, right up until your 6th time. So yeah, this is pretty spooky. I kind of want to try this on the vlog channel. But there's also something so weird about doing like peekaboo to yourself. It's almost kind of funny as well. Okay, and then there's a really creepy creepypasta, and this story is called The Staring. Now this doesn't have to do exactly with peekaboo, but I felt like this story kind of meshed in because of the context, and you'll see why. This is about a guy that recently moved into a new townhouse, and the story starts off with him lying in his bed, absolutely exhausted from packing and unpacking. But what's strange is that even though he's so tired, he just can't seem to sleep, and he's lying there tossing and turning in his bed, and he watches as 3:45 a.m. rolls around on his clock. There was nothing else he could do but lie there and stare at the ceiling, and his heart almost stopped in his chest when he saw an eye staring back at him through a hole in his ceiling. The room was so dark that he could barely see it, but he knew it was there. It didn't blink, it didn't look around the room, it only watched him. And minutes rolled by of it just staring at him. This happened night after night, and he grew super uncomfortable being watched so intently. So he decided to make his way up the stairs to the attic with an old baseball bat in his hands, and he didn't call the police at first because his phone line hadn't yet been connected, so he took it upon himself to go and apprehend the peeping Tom. However, upon reaching the attic, he was confused to find there was no one there. There was no intruder or even the slightest sign that someone had been up in his attic for years perhaps. The layers of dust that had settled upon the old boxes was thick and undisturbed, and the area around the small hole in the floor was also untouched, so he decided to take a box and just sort of push it over that until he was able to replace that particular board. Well, the following night he had only slept for 4 short hours before something inside of him forced him to open his eyes. And there it was again, the eye, silently staring back at him with burning intensity. And for a moment he thought that he could even make out the sound of breathing, but he wasn't sure if it was his own fearful breaths or the breathing that lurked above him. This eye had been staring at him since he first moved into his 2-story townhouse, and just before he was so exhausted that he was about to fall asleep, the eye disappeared. It was gone. But then the handle of his bedroom door started to turn. And that is how this story ends. So I know it's not like Peekaboo, but Peekaboo has to do with your eyes and like seeing something. So I thought this story sort of mixed in with this. Have you ever used just your hand, a light, and a wall to make a shadow figure? Perhaps it was a dog, or maybe a rabbit, or a monster? If so, you've already had some experience with shadow puppets, which, like I said, I feel like we all have at some point. If you haven't, literally turn off the lights in your room, go grab a flashlight, a night light, your phone light, and go try it on your wall. Shadow puppetry, also called shadow play, got its start thousands of years ago in China and India. This unique form of storytelling is the oldest type of puppetry in the world. So before they started to make those creepy marionette dolls, creepy sock puppets, creepy anything with material, they only used their hands or pieces of paper to make shadow. Shadow puppets are figures that are placed between a light and a screen or a wall. Moving them creates the illusion of moving images on the screen. An experienced puppeteer can make figures appear to walk, talk, fight, and dance. So you can literally put on entire hour-length plays with just shadows, which is just so cool to me, but also so creepy because why do shadows scare us so much? Shadow puppetry is a popular form of entertainment in countries all over the world, like China, India, Indonesia, and Turkey. And those places specifically have been very important to the development of this art form of puppetry. And there are so many different types of plays that they put on with different themes depending on where you're from around the world. For example, in China, shadow plays are based on legends and different folk tales that they tell there. In Indonesia, shadow plays tend to be based on religious stories of good and evil. And in Turkey, shadow plays are more lighthearted and humorous, so they like the comedy aspect of things. The first shadow puppets were likely made out of animal hides. Since they were strong and flexible, they allowed the puppeteer to move the puppet easily to create the desired effects on the screen. And the leather material is still a very popular one to make these puppets out of, but obviously the most easy thing to use if you don't have material is your hands. You can make them talk like that. Okay, so we're going to be talking about a very creepy story. This is called The Talking Hand. Are you surprised about that? Because I'm not. There's a creepy story of a boy that had been seeing a strange shadow hand in his room ever since he was very little. He thinks it maybe started when he was about 2 or 3. He had this nightlight at the very very end of his bed that shone onto the wall in front of him. And one night when he was about to fall asleep, this hand popped up on the wall at the end of his bed. It was just a shadow and it was in the shape of a sideways profile of a head, like this. It just stood completely still there for a few minutes, and just when he was about to call for his mom, it began speaking.
Hey, Timothy!
It said in a very jolly voice. It almost sounded like a clown to him, like very high-pitched and sort of goofy. You know, kind of like it was trying to appeal to a young child, which is very creepy.
Wanna play a game with me?
So the boy nodded his head, thinking that maybe it was one of his parents trying to just like play a joke on him or something.
You just have to come over here and give me a high five.
The shadow told him, but Timothy started to get some bad vibes. He started to feel like something was not right here. He wasn't sure if he could trust it, so he just pulled the covers over his head and fell asleep. This happened for years and years, and each time he would hide under the covers so he wouldn't have to look at it. But one day, when he turned 9, he decided to step out of his bed and walk towards the shadow. He reached out his hand as he approached the wall to touch this shadow figure. And once he did, he turned around to see this bony, gray figure with yellow eyes sticking out from under the bottom of his bed, staring at him. He was right in front of the nightlight, holding up this long, skinny, creepy arm, and he was holding it out in the shape of a hand and a sideways profile. We had a sneeze intermission right at the good part too. So this thing literally grabs him and pulls him under the bed, and he was never ever seen again. So the whole time it was trying to get Timothy to step out of his bed to walk to the very end so he can go out and grab him and pull him under, which is so scary. He never wanted to play, he never wanted a high five, he just wanted a meal. Okay, and then we have another story called Talk to the Hand. It reminds me of that like phrase, you know, talk to the hand, not the face. And actually that phrase originated from the 1990s. It was said by like a comedian in a show, and then people just started saying it in real life. Some people say like talk to the hand because the ears aren't listening. It's definitely a very sassy phrase. Well, there is this strange story that takes the phrase quite literally. A little girl told her parents that she was able to make a man's face on the wall with the shadow of her hands, which they didn't really seem to find weird because like kids do strange stuff like that. But what she said next actually did start to worry them a bit. She said that she was able to talk to her hands, and they thought that maybe she was just using her imagination to play around. They would hear her upstairs giggling and talking in her room, but one day while her mother was folding laundry, she heard a deep voice coming from somewhere in the house. She became afraid because her husband wasn't home and he was the only man that they knew to live there. So she thought that someone maybe broke in and began running around her house looking around but didn't see anything. So she burst into her daughter's room to see her in the dark with the flashlight pointed to the wall, holding her hands up to create an old man's face. She asked her daughter if she had the TV on, and she said no. And just when the mom was leaving the room, she heard a deep voice begin to sing, "Row, row, row your boat." Like literally she heard,
Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream.
and when she turned around, the shadow puppet on the wall was opening and closing its mouth singing this. And when she looked at her daughter's mouth, it was completely shut. So yeah, that just gave me the complete spooks. I do not like that. Really creeps me out. Takes such like a light-hearted game and makes it just really terrifying.
In an enchanted realm, an oddity stirs, beckoning the curious. Meet Jessii, once ensnared, now awakened, waiting to be yours.